Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman.
And I'm your host, Cindy Edwards.
And I'm your host, Martina Tam.
That's right, everybody. We are back, all three of us again, to introduce today's very special episode. They're all special, but I like to highlight that each one is special. So this is our very special episode, which is part 2 of our conversation around self-forgiveness. And on this particular episode, we're going to have a conversation between Martina and Dustin, which, Martina, I just want to tell you, I think it was an awesome conversation. And, I'm really glad that you and Dustin, had such a powerful, intense, and vulnerable conversation that folks get to listen to.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited for people to take a listen, and hopefully it's something people can connect with.
Yeah, I know they will. And then we also have my first segment. I don't even know if I told you all I was going to do a segment, but I decided I'm doing a segment. And in the middle of the segment, I named it Teddy Bear Moses Moments, because, we already have a Martina segment, and I think having a Martin segment, it's just too much, too confusing. So we have a Teddy Bear Moses Moments segment from now on. Or, not now on, not like it's going to be every time, but it's debuting today.
There you go. And Martin, do you want to share with our listeners how you got the name Teddy Bear Moses?
Yes, I would say that in my anti-racist organizing days, I had a friend and a colleague in the anti-racist white world. And I was having a conversation with her one time, and she said, you are like a teddy bear of Moses. And I was like, wow. She said, you're soft and cuddly and fight tirelessly for liberation. So that's how I got the name.
Nice.
And And since then, it's become my spiritual name. And I should also say, Cindy, that my parents named me Moses. They named me Moshe in Hebrew, which is Moses. But at the time, they didn't think that, like Moses would be an easy name. They thought I'd get teased all the time. So they gave me the English name of Martin. So I've had that spirit of Moses with me since I was born.
There you go. Well, thank you for sharing. I know you've shared in previous podcasts, but in case any of our listeners, haven't been able to listen to any of our past podcasts, it's just a little update as to where Martin got his nickname from.
I appreciate you asking. So I pretty much consider that my spiritual persona now, and it works. It works for me. So the first Teddy Bear Moses moment is with my wife, Felicia, and my friend and colleague, Stephany Ashley. And we're going to have a conversation I'm going to tell you all, I throw a little curveball out at the beginning, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I want you to listen, but it wasn't quite what they were 100% prepared for, which actually I liked because it led to a very live conversation, which I'm excited for you all to hear. So we just want to remind everybody that if you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe and hit like. And whatever format you're listening to us on, whatever your favorite podcast format, please subscribe. This allows us to reach more and more people and to grow our family, to grow our movement. So like us, subscribe, and I would just say enjoy today's conversation. Let's go.
Welcome back, everybody, to another segment with me, Martina. I'm super excited today to continue our conversation about self-forgiveness. And we've invited Dustin Washington back to talk with us a little more about self-forgiveness and health. Hey, Dustin, how are you doing?
Hey, Martina, I'm really good. I'm excited for this conversation. Such a important and juicy topic. So I'm super pumped up to talk with you.
Juicy topic. I am too. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So what I was hoping to talk with you a little bit, Dustin, was sort of what has been your experience with being both acutely ill and being in the hospital, as well as having a chronic illness, and the role of self-forgiveness. And kind of why this came to my mind was after we talked with Devin last week. You know, he talked a lot about not wanting the events that he talked with us about to be what define him. Mm-hmm. And it made me think so often in medicine, how we define people by their illness. Right. Like, oh, that's my diabetic patient. Oh, that's my patient with this. And how we're actually trying to move away from that and say, like, this is a person who has a diagnosis of, so the person comes first and the disease is not their defining adjective. And so I wanted to hear a little bit from you and your experiences from the patient end about, do you think there's a role of self-forgiveness and healing after been both in the hospital and having a chronic illness?
Oh, absolutely. And so let me say, my first experience with the healthcare system, beyond regular checkups and things like that, breaking my hand or whatever, was having pancreatitis twice. I had pancreatitis in 2012, and first time I was hospitalized for 3 days. And Martina, I attributed that bout, at least in the consciousness that I was in at the time, to just eating too much meat, right? Mm-hmm. High triglycerides. But the truth is, it was rooted in my alcoholism that has been active since I was 13 years old. Mm. And so February the 6th, 2017, I went into the hospital. It was so crazy because I was supposed to fly to Philly that day, and it had snowed here in Seattle. So flights were not going out, which was a savior. Because what's crazy is the first time I had pancreatitis, I was on a flight back from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I remember being on the plane and I was just like freezing. And I was asking the flight attendants for blankets. And then, the next day I woke up, I felt a little better. And that night I just again had that feeling of a hot knife in my stomach and just sweaty. And, went into the hospital. They told me I had pancreatitis. But again, I was in denial around the root cause of the pancreatitis, which was alcoholism. And so that night of February the 6th, 2017, I went back into the hospital in some of the worst pain that I've ever felt in my life. And, of course, that was the trip, the hospitalization that made me have to confront the root causes of that, which would be alcoholism. And then my second primary, which is a current engagement with the healthcare system, is being a diabetic. And to the point where now I have to take 10 milligrams of insulin every day. So diabetes is very present in my life.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me and with our listeners. It's so interesting. You used the word, I am a diabetic. And I wanted to break that down with you a little bit.
Sure.
Is that something you identify as a part of your identity? And how does that make you feel?
That's such an interesting question, because I'm just thinking about defining myself as a diabetic. As you said that back to me, typically I will say I have diabetes, right? Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, I was in denial around diabetes for many, many years. They would classify me as being pre-diabetic, and diabetes runs through and through in my family. Both sides. I had my grandfather on my father's side, essentially died from diabetes. Wow. And so I knew I had a propensity for, having full-blown diabetes. But, I think for me today, as a part of the healing journey, it's important for me to say right now today that I am diabetic, mentally for me to move towards a pathway of pushing my diabetes back, and there's some things I know I could be doing actively to mitigate the impact of diabetes on my life. So part of me owning it right now is really coming to grips with the fact that behaviors and patterns and habits in my groundwater have led me to self-destructive behavior that, again, where now I have to take insulin. So, but am I a diabetic? Just like, it's almost akin to I'm an alcoholic, right? Well, that's not all I am. But alcoholism is something that's part of my story. And by claiming it, it's been helpful for me to claim it, to own it, and to have no denial around it. But, there's so many interesting questions that come up from that. Like, when are you ever healed of alcoholism, right? Because some people say it's a disease that afflicts you forever. But more than anything, it's a spiritual disease, right? And the same behaviors that, for me, as I look at diabetes, what's underneath me getting diabetes, even though I had that genetic propensity for diabetes, there was a spiritual disease that drove me becoming, to the point where I have to use insulin.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It sounds like kind of being able to name that having diabetes or being a diabetic is sort of that part of that acceptance, which is moving towards healing both physically and emotionally, whether it's the diabetes or alcoholism. That's kind of what I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, when I can fully say I'm on the recovery journey with diabetes, I would probably define myself as a recovering diabetic, just like I would define myself as a recovering alcoholic, not just that I'm an alcoholic or a recovering adult child of alcoholics. I mean, the recovering piece, especially in the realm of our topic around self-forgiveness, self-forgiveness is a key component of the recovery journey. And to be brutally honest with everyone, I have not been 100% on my own side as it relates to me being fully on the recovery path to diabetes. And that realization, that truth, is a big part of my spiritual work, my individual work that I'm doing in terms of my growth and sending myself to the next realm of my life.
I appreciate you saying that. And that's something I kind of want to explore a little bit more in this segment. We talked a lot about the emotional forgiveness and healing, and, mental and physical health are absolutely intertwined. But I kind of want to hear from you a little bit more about, when we are diagnosed with an illness, sometimes that's something that can be more visible in our bodies. And sometimes I wonder if it can feel kind of more, I don't know, for you, does it ever feel like it's something less reversible when it's something physical versus something emotional?
It's hard for me to separate them out. When I think about, like, I know concretely if my exercise regimen was 100% on point, if my diet, my daily diet, what I put into my body in terms of food was 100% on point, I would be able to knock these numbers back and not have to take insulin, not have to take any oral medications. I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so I'm an intelligent person. And so the question I've been asking myself, been asking Martin, my D, my sponsors, is really trying to understand how I could know this truth and not engage in behaviors that would be healing behaviors. And so, of course, that led me to really continue to explore, well, what's in my groundwater? What programs do I have? And the truth is, I have never had a program that really supported both physical health in terms of exercise, ongoing, consistent exercise. Like, I'd be in something, like I'm a martial artist and I do martial arts, right? But in terms of a daily practice of physical health, I've been in and out my whole life. And, when I look back at my childhood, that wasn't something that was in the groundwater of my family. There was no, my stepfather rode bikes and he would ride, from one side of New Jersey to the other. I mean, he's pretty serious about it. But other than that, like, it was never important in my family. As a kid, of course, I played sports all the time, so I was doing that as a kid. But as an adult, my physical activity was lifting a drink, to my mouth, at a bar or a club somewhere, at a young age. And there's also a program that I inherited around impulsive eating and eating anything that I want at any time just because I have a craving for it or because I'm trying to stuff some emotion. And that was something that was shown to me. And that was something that I've taken on. And now it's a part of my groundwater. So, Martina, so much of the task for me is coming to grips with the fact that I did not have a program in support of me being healthy enough to not get diabetes. And now I'm in the process of creating a new program within myself that supports me moving past diabetes. And, the thing I want to say is I know I can do it because I also had a program that led me to alcoholism. And I could trace all that back with you. But I had to create a new program to now, you were at my 5th year celebration. I've had over 5 years of sobriety right now in recovery from alcoholism, both the physical recovery as well as the spiritual, emotional recovery. So I know I can do something because, I can remember talking to Martin about alcoholism, like, what would I do? Like, what would I do with people? If I go to Hawaii, what am I going to do without drinking? Like, it was such a part of my life. I couldn't imagine it. And this journey around diabetes is very parallel to that journey around alcoholism. In many ways holds the same life and death consequences,
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think you have pinpointed what I'm hoping to talk about, which is, like you said, like, I'm an intelligent person. I know what I need to do. And I think that's the case, I would say, for almost all of my patients. Like, it's rare that I have a patient who's like, absolutely, I have prediabetes. I'm going to make all these lifestyle changes, and then that they're able to stick with it. And yet we all know, it's about eating the right foods, which we all know what they are more or less, and getting more physical activity. And yet it's something that's so hard to do, which is why we have all these drugs and all these illnesses and all these poor health outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so, I know for me, even like I work in healthcare, and I don't think you know this, but when I was pregnant, I was busy, I was stressed, I wasn't eating right, I wasn't exercising, and they do that diabetes test in the middle of your pregnancy. And my first test came back high, and it was like a real scare for me. So I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I have gestational diabetes. And what does that mean for my baby's health, my health, both in pregnancy and moving forward? So that programming is something, I've experienced in a different scale, but also experienced and very well knowing, like to a degree that I've studied for years about like how this could affect me by not eating right, by not exercising in pregnancy. For me, it was a big wake up call, and I was able for my pregnancy then to make all these changes. I'm curious for you, like, what has it looked like to start this reprogramming, and how does self-forgiveness play a role in that?
It plays a major role. For me, the first thing is, going back to what we originally talked about, really being forthrightly honest that I'm struggling with my food. I'm really struggling with my diet, and I'm struggling with establishing a rhythm of a daily physical practice, and I pushed myself to go out and walk yesterday, right? Or actually I ran, but I didn't do it today, right? And now it's 7:00 at night. And so since we're talking, I'll probably do something when we get off this podcast, but making it a regular practice is something I struggle with. And so being able to be honest with the people that I'm the closest with, of course, Megan, people like you, Martina, Martin, Madi, Hank, the folks that I'm the closest with. I think that's the first thing, just to be able to be honest. And so there's no shame around it. There's no hiding around it. Because, essentially I'm approaching food like an addict. And one of the things, they say our secrets make us sick. And so being able to really be upfront about the fact of, I'm eating poorly and I'm not taking care of my physical body. So that's the first step. Then I think, the question you have around self-forgiveness is so important because, part of the program that I had was this punishing program that I would punish myself for not being where I think I ought to be in my life. I called my D this morning. I was driving down to Centralia for a basketball tournament, and I called him to ask the question, because someone was sharing to me that I was the person they most see in their power. Someone was saying that to me recently. And I was like, that's a beautiful thing to hear. And I know areas where I'm not in my power, i.e. food and physical exercise. So I was asking Madi, how do you balance that without beating yourself up? Because I have such a habit from a young child of beating myself up for not being essentially perfect. Madi's answer was simple but profound. Just keep growing, right? We have infinite potential. And so if you couple that notion of just keep growing, being able to forgive myself for the program that I inherited, that wasn't my choice, but also to take responsibility simultaneously for the program I have right now. Like there's nothing wrong with me, right? And in many ways, I took on that program to cope with things as a young person, abuse and trauma that I experienced as a child, because I had no other way. So for me, it was like, okay, I can go eat a cheesesteak hoagie and get some pizza and go up to 7-Eleven, get a bunch of candy bars and Slurpees, because that'll make me feel better in the moment. Right. I had no language for let alone any coping skills for what I was experiencing. And so I saw other people around me use food as a drug. So I started using food as a drug. And so now as an adult who knows what I know, who as someone who's been on a healing journey, is someone who has an understanding of subconscious programming and the groundwater and the lingering effects of trauma and addiction. I have the tools. It's just me applying them and continuously applying them until they become a new program. But the self-forgiveness, if I hold myself if I engage in any self-shame, any beating up of myself around this, it will keep me stuck in a loop. And so I'm so fortunate to have so many mirrors in my life, like you and, all the folks that I've named already who can kind of shine back to me, no, D, don't do that to yourself. We still have to be 100% on our own side, even though we have areas that we know we need to grow around.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that, for me is what I'm taking away for me as a healthcare provider, working on becoming a healer. I think so much of what you said is that self-shame. And I think so often we're numbers focused in medicine. Like I think about diabetes. I'm like, your A1C goal is this. Let's do this to get you there. We'll check you in 3 months. And people come in or people miss their appointment. They miss the labs because of that shame. And so
right.
That's why I think this kind of work is so important for people in my profession too, because as we've talked a lot about is, we show up pretty unhealthy in this job. And how does that reflect back on our patients? And we're not talking about this. Like, I think we talk a little bit in medicine about how food is an addiction, but we're not talking about the root causes of why are we using food as an addiction, a way to numb the pain, a way to cope. And then, of course, on the bigger scale, and again, I think we can't just blame externally from us, but our society was designed this way. We took all that cultural knowledge out from many communities of the cultural knowledge of how do we eat well, how do we heal with food, how do we heal with activity to make people sick, keep them poor.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, you said so much, for me growing up in South Jersey, organic food and, healthy food and low carbs, none of that was in the consciousness, And one of the things I've experienced, my doctor's wonderful. She's an amazing human being. And I know that my choices of lifestyle change, they're not going to come just from my conscious mind. Mm-hmm. They're not going to come they're not going to stick. Let me say this. They're not going to stick until I make them a new groundwater program. And that's only going to happen through repetition, essentially recognizing the program, which is pretty clear about, replacing it with a new program. And then where I keep getting stuck and keep getting half in, half out. And it's probably, not even probably, it's really an issue of commitment and making a real strong decision around this. And I think I haven't made that. And, I'm assuming there's part of me that feels, and it's hard to say that some way, shape or form, maybe I don't deserve that level of physical health. And so, I'm really trying to, this is my primary focus in terms of areas of growth for me right now. This is my primary focus because I know it's going to impact everything else I do. I'm going to perform better with the Soul Focus group. I'm going to have more energy for my little ones who require tons of energy. I'm going to be a better basketball coach, a better lover, a better friend, a better partner, a better everything in this world. And so, I'm taking it on. And hopefully, Martina, not even hopefully, there will be a time when we'll be sitting at a restaurant and it'll be like 3 years of celebrating my new lifestyle as it relates to exercise and food. But, Martina, you said something that was really important. And so this question around self-forgiveness, one of the things, so in recovery, one of the things you do is you actively go out and make amends for the harm that you've caused. And it's a magical experience. Because, most people don't go and confront folks that they've hurt and really seek forgiveness and owning what they did. And so for me, it was such a healing journey. But what I found the most important amends for us to make was the amends to ourselves. And so you think about not just the healthcare profession, but any law enforcement, education, there's things that we do that, upon reflection, we can see we've been socialized to do through our training and through our just broader socialization that might cause harm to the folks that we serve. But one of I think the most important cleansing process we can engage in is an amends to ourselves, and that's not just a one-time thing. For me, around my relationship to food, like if I get up in 1 a.m. and binge on some Ben and Jerry's that I've hidden in the ice cream in the freezer, right? It just doesn't serve me to beat myself up. It's just like, okay, I'm still in this. I got to keep working at this. So that amends self-forgiveness process is an ongoing process. And it just has so many magical healing properties embedded in it when we engage in both forgiveness of self as well as seeking forgiveness of others.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it has me thinking so many things, but I'm just going to ask kind of one last question for us to end on. We talked about our hope is a few years from now, we're going to be celebrating your sobriety from food and that being in sort of a diabetic recovery, which I love that phrase. Like, I'm a diabetic in recovery. I think that's really powerful. So I'm curious for you, what's next? What's the next kind of amends? You talked about the important role in making amends. Is there one kind of next amends that you see like you're making you need to make in terms of this journey of recovery with diabetes?
Yeah, it's really about forgiving myself for the choices I've made in relationship to food, for not valuing my body enough to get out and sweat and exercise every day, not just 2-3 days a week, but every day. And forgiving myself for those root reasons of why I don't do that, right? And so, as I'm thinking about this, and thinking about the connection to poor eating and emotional eating to trauma that I experienced, I didn't create those events that happened in my childhood, but I developed experiences around them and meaning around them in terms of my worth in this world, being able to forgive myself for seeing myself any less than the beautiful, divine being that I am on this planet. And so being able to forgive myself at those deepest levels, and not just inside of myself, having that conversation with myself, but articulating that conversation to people that I love and trust, like you and Madi and Martin and all the folks in the family, being able to articulate that out loud, which allows for there to be an intimate chain of accountability. And, as we talked about accountability, not that you're going to check me like, if I see you eating the cookie, but that you're going to hold me to my most powerful, beautiful self because you love me and you want me to be here. And the importance of me being here, not just for you, but for my children and for the world. Right. And so I think just, where I know that I'm just going to be putting this fully on the table in the same way that I put alcoholism on the table. When I first went into recovery, that's all I talked about. People were hanging out with me, like, come go to an AA meeting with me. I went to AA meetings 6 days a week for 3 years when I started on my recovery journey. So it's going to require that level of commitment and that level of forgiving myself for how essentially I played myself with food and not exercising to the point that I'm taking insulin, but loving myself enough to move beyond this and to let this place in time be a place that strengthens me moving forward. Like, so as I overcome and recover from diabetes, that's just going to make me that much stronger and be able to share my story with other people as well. So, us having this conversation was so timely because it's like real time. This is exactly what I'm dealing with right now, and so just your timing is beautiful.
Well, I just really want to thank you, Dustin. I have been so moved by our conversation this evening and for your honesty with all of us and the vulnerability about your processes and what you're going through right now to realize your full health. And just want to say, I love you. Our fam at Soul Focus Group loves you. And, I'm going to uphold you in that love and that so that that you deserve your full health, physical and emotional. And we're always here for you.
I love you too. I love you too.
So thank you so much for this powerful conversation tonight. I'm hoping it's something that some of our listeners can resonate with. And, feel free, those of you listening to the podcast, to reach out as well, comment, and we can continue this conversation. There's so much richness here. Really looking forward to more conversations, and hopefully we can keep talking about self-forgiveness and how it relates to health. So thank you again, Dustin.
Thank you. Thank you. Peace.
Creating is the new way of fighting. At the Soul Focus Group, we're doing something radical, people. Instead of fighting against racism, sexism, and classism, which are all designed to keep us apart, we are bringing people back together again. Want to know how? By creating human solidarity. In doing so, we're improving productivity, increasing effectiveness, and transforming the way people communicate. Essentially, we're healing broken relationships. Let us bring our Creating Human Solidarity 2-day workshop to your business or organization. Sign up for this 2-day in-person workshop at thesoulfocusgroup.com because it's time we come together.
Well, hello, everyone. This is the premiere of Martin's segment. You've been listening to Cindy's segment and Martina's segment. Now I get a segment. And actually, I'm going to name mine Teddy Bear Moses. Teddy Bear Moses' moment is what I'm going to name mine. I just named it on the fly. You all are hearing podcast history in the making. So welcome to Teddy Bear Moses' moment. And I'm really excited to have the conversation around self-forgiveness in a way that feels very unique to me. I invited two women who I really both love and care about, both of these women. They're both important in my life in very different ways, as you'll see. And I've had the conversation around forgiveness with both of them. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, who better to have on this podcast together than my wife, Felicia Savage Friedman. Hello, Felicia.
Hello.
And my colleague, Stephany Ashley. Hello, Stephany.
Hi.
Thank you both for joining me so much. I really appreciate it. First of all, how are you all doing today? How's life?
Life is good. Life is good. In this moment, I feel like I'm right where I'm supposed to be. So I'm really grateful to be here and excited to be talking to you two.
Beautiful.
Yes. I too, very similar to Stephany, do believe that I'm right where I'm supposed to be in this moment. It just feels like there's a level of synchronicity that is just culminated right here, and a lot of work to get here to this point. But I feel good in my body, my physical body, my emotional body. I'm feeling really good. Yeah. So I'm able to be present with you all, fully present. And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing. And, super glad that you both agreed to take the time to do this. I know you're both super busy, so very appreciative. So this is, I'm thinking, who do I want to talk to about self-forgiveness? And part of the reason why I thought about it is you all were scheduled to do something together for Felicia's work for Yoga Roots on Location. Yeah. And for various reasons, it didn't happen. But I kind of had the two of you together in my mind. And I've had conversations with both of you, Felicia, over the almost 5 years we've been married and almost 6 years we've known each other. Wow. And Stephany over the year and a half, 2 years. I think we've met virtually close to 2 years now, if I'm not mistaken.
Over 2 years.
Wow.
Over 2 years. And as I said at the very beginning, I've had conversations with both of you around forgiveness and what that looks like. Felicia and I have talked a lot about self-forgiveness. You and I, not so much, Stephany, but part of the draw for me is that I know both of you have had very complicated relationships with men and relationships with men that have included harm. And I've talked to both of you at various times about a process of forgiveness that you've gone through with men. And I thought that it would be really interesting to have this conversation with you as a man, to really dig into a little bit forgiveness in general as it leads to self-forgiveness. And I'm of course coming from the place where I have found forgiving myself more difficult, more challenging, and ultimately more rewarding than forgiving other people in my life. So I really wanted to just hear, you all talk about what forgiveness has been like for you, and also specifically working our way towards the conversation around self-forgiveness. So whoever's feeling moved to go first, just jump in.
Oh.
We're both like, oh.
So just so everybody knows, I did not prep. I did not prep them at all about what I was going to talk about. The only thing I said I was going to talk about was self-forgiveness. So this is live. It's recorded, but it's recorded.
Yeah. I didn't know we were going to have to forgive men. No, just kidding.
I know. Steph, that was so funny because I was like, he didn't say that.
Yeah.
Forgiving men, I thought it was just self-forgiveness. As if it's separate, because it's
right.
Really, the way I see it, it's really not. But
exactly.
In my body though, Stephany, I agree. There was a visceral response that I had. I was like, oh shit, I didn't, I'm sorry. I am able to cuss, right?
You are.
Okay. That's still, there's a lot of tenderness and trauma around that, for me, in terms of forgiving men, especially, and I don't know if you experienced this too, Stephany, but, how do you forgive? Something that I'm really curious about and inquiring, on the personal level right now, actually, that's why this is so tender, is that how do you forgive someone when they're still causing you harm?
Mm-hmm.
And that, that's not just limited to men, in patriarchy or sexism, but, what does that process look like when, folks are still causing harm?
Yeah.
Not necessarily in the same way, but there's still harm being caused. And so that's just something that, personally I've been thinking on. But to bring it back, because I really do believe like I was brought into this world with, a lineage that forgives other people, so quickly, or actually it's the performance of forgiveness of other people. But there wasn't a practice around self-forgiveness. There was, this kind of implosion that emotionally was happening, while performing forgiveness to other people, because I don't think we can give something that we haven't nurtured in ourselves. It's just the performance of that, and this is just something that I've been really thinking strong about.
I so love that, I made that joke and then that you said as if they're separate things. Cause that's exactly, I agree with that so much, that like, really it's like what we give ourselves is what we give others, and what we give others is what we give ourselves. Like, the energy that we're like sort of cultivating inside of ourselves, it doesn't really matter who the subject is or the recipient is, like we're receiving it. If we're cultivating it, we're receiving it. And so I realized for myself that, especially after a trauma, like I experienced a sexual trauma that was also a very psychological trauma, when I was very young and doing sex work. And I spent many years afterwards doing this thing of blame, like blaming the person that set me up with this client, blaming the client, blaming myself, blaming the person that set me up, blaming him, blaming myself, just really kind of tormenting myself with whose fault was it that this happened, right? And what I realized is that ultimately that was just me trying to get control over an out of control situation, right? Like there was a situation that happened that was outside of my control, and I was trying to get narrative control of it by deciding whose fault it was. And that actually, like the energy that I needed to heal from that there wasn't any, like, there's no answer where you land on whose fault it is and then you suddenly feel better. It's actually just about releasing and letting go and accepting that something harmful that was outside of your control happened, right? And then figuring out what is the energy that you need in order to heal from it. And so for me, like the piece around forgiveness and, around specifically Martin's referencing, when I got into Al-Anon, I did this whole 4th step process on men, which was reviewing all of my resentments against men, and then looking at sort of my part in it, and then sort of healing those resentments. And it was very freeing, very, very freeing for me, because the same, like the energy that I was carrying around towards, approximately half the planet is the same energy I was directing at myself. And so anyways, I just love that you immediately pointed out that they're the same thing, because I think they are.
Oh, that's powerful. Thank you for self-disclosing, Stephany. That's really a powerful testimony. And thank you for doing that work around your own healing.
Yeah, I really thank you for how vulnerable you just were. And also I thank you for doing that work too. because otherwise I don't think I could be in your life at all right now,
Yeah.
Stephany, if you hadn't done that work.
No.
And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, is because both of you, and again, very, very different ways, and because I have very obviously extremely different relationships with both of you. And I also know that I wouldn't be in relationship with either of you had you not done that, a high level of work on yourselves.
Yeah, that's real rap. Yeah. And definitely for me, as a Black cisgender woman, being in an intimate relationship with a white man, white Jewish man, it definitely could not have happened, Stephany, had I not done this work, because Martin is the first white guy I've ever dated, and as I, the joke changes. I said, he's the last one I'll marry. It's like, I would not have been able to see his humanity had I not done this level of intimate forgiveness of myself, along with forgiving men. And I'm still on a journey with that, because, things happen politically, just in our lives, and it just brings it up close and personal again, just the harms, and it's a harm of just not being seen, not being heard, not being trusted, not being believed, like there's the whole idea around trusting Black women.
Yep.
And it's a real thing that, I live through daily, and so that level of trust only comes from the process of forgiving myself. That's the only way that, I could have been in a trusting relationship with Martin, which the relationship with Martin is the healthiest, intimate relationship I've ever had in my life. Which, I that's why I share with folks, I was like, this level of self-inquiry is so important, because it affects every aspect of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and trust, that's the piece too, is it's like, I'm thinking about your question, Felicia, about how do you forgive people when they're actively doing harm still? And it's like, I think that forgiveness and trust are really directly related, because when we can forgive ourselves, it's also a practice of trusting ourselves. And when we trust ourselves, we're also sort of saying, like, I trust myself, like, not to put myself in harm's way. I trust myself to know my boundaries. I trust myself to, be my own, like, advocate for myself. I trust myself to honor myself. And when we really start to I don't think most of us are taught how to do that. I don't think most people are taught how to do that. But once we start to learn how to do that, then it's like, I can sort of acknowledge and accept this person or this, government or this whatever, like, political party. I know that they do not have my safety and my well-being in mind, and I trust myself to navigate this situation knowing that, and therefore I don't need to, like, be afraid that I can't navigate, like, that terrain. Like, I think about how many relationships with men I just would not even enter into for so long because I was like, trust no man, and now I'm sort of like, well, I actually, through that healing, I've been able to have these beautiful friendships, with Martin, with Dustin, to learn so much from straight cisgender men that I wouldn't have been able to if I had still been like, trust no man. But part of what shifted for me is that I was like, I trust myself, and I trust myself now to know that if someone is not respecting my boundaries, I can make a choice to leave that situation, right? And obviously there's many situations where it's not that easy to make that choice. But for myself now in my, like, adult relationships, I trust myself to be able to do that. And therefore I'm able to, like, enter into, sort of experiences and relationships with less sort of prejudgment,
Oh, yes. That's powerful, Stephany. That's, Oof.
Yeah, this is all of this is amazing to listen to, and I think I want to transition in just a minute to something that you said that Stephany. But I also, part of the reason why I wanted to have you both on here and have this conversation is because even though I am a man, male identified person, I am a man, have been my whole life. And I'm saying that not to be funny. I'm saying that out of seriousness,
Yeah,
you
you're
know, and
cisgender. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm cisgendered. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so I also have been harmed by men
Mm-hmm.
and as a small child. And, you know, I started reflecting on what forgiveness has been like for me. And it's a really interesting dynamic when you're a man and you have to forgive men. If you're male identified, you have to, part of the reason why I say male identified in terms of who I have to forgive, because, you know, one of the people that, you know, harmed me when I was a very small child was a boy himself. So definitely a boy, a man, you know, and so that has also been part of my process too. And it's not anything I've really talked about, certainly not publicly like this, but I've also had to find a way to forgive men. And I oftentimes have found myself more comfortable with women. Throughout the course of my life, I found myself more comfortable with women because and I don't trust men as much. I've had issues trusting men. And so a little bit of I want to say selfish, but there's a self-identification, you know, motive behind my asking you all the question that I asked you, to combine the conversation about self-forgiveness with specific issues around forgiving men. Because from a very different perspective, I've had to do the same thing.
Right. That's powerful. Thank you for that offering, Martin. Yeah. Thank you for your vulnerability. Yeah. This is a process of healing that, I don't know. I just had a feeling just wash over me with you saying that, Martin, that, of like peace, of joy, that, you know, the young folks coming up really have an opportunity to heal in ways that we as young folks weren't given the opportunity. You know what I mean, you all? Like,
yes,
for us to be able to self-disclose, these are not the conversations that I heard growing up, you know? And I'm really excited for our youth. And I'm, you know, I hopeful and faithful that, you know, even as tumultuous as these times are, you know, the level of honesty that, you know, that we're sharing with each other, you know, for our young folks to hear this, this is really powerful. We're breaking generational curses, you all. We really are, you know.
Agree.
Because, you know, as Audre Lorde says, your silence, you know, will not save you, you know. And so us sharing our stories and how we've navigated, you know, trauma is really important, because it's the how-tos that, you know, other folks are able to learn from, you know. So thank you both.
Well, that concludes part 1 of my conversation with Felicia and Stephany. And tune in next week for part 2.
When it comes to racism, the truth is most people are only reporting on the problem. They're not solving the problem. At the Human Solidarity Project, we're doing something to solve the problem. Through our Sending the Right Signal workshop, we are teaching organizations and businesses how to move beyond DEI work. Next, we're teaching organizations how to heal from the damage caused by racism. And finally, we're showing organizations how to create cultural integration and truly bring people together. Sign up for these 3 virtual workshops today at soulfocusgroup.com. Your organization will never be the same.
Well, that was awesome. Once again, feel really good about what we did today. I hope you all enjoyed listening to it. So far, out of our group of 3 people, I'm the only one that's had the opportunity to hear all of the different segments, because I was a part of either recording them, you know, or participating in them. So I feel really good about where we are in this conversation. I think, you know, in talking to, as you all just heard, and talking to Felicia and Steph, you know, I threw them a little curveball, and I think they reacted really well. I think it got to some really live conversations about forgiveness as it takes place between women and men, as well as the idea of how self-forgiveness is essential to that process and to everything that we do. Also, Martina, I was able to listen to you and Dustin, your conversation, and I thought that was awesome. What did you think about the conversation you had with Dustin?
Oh, I love the conversation. He really helped me think about, illness and chronic diseases on a deeper level, and the role of self-forgiveness for ourselves, and has me really thinking about, gosh, how do I start working with my patients differently? And how do I start practicing more self-forgiveness? I shared a little bit about my own health scare during pregnancy, and learning also to give myself grace, and that, like we were saying, perfection is not real. And we also strive for that, I think, with our health and with our bodies. And so giving myself grace as well, and, learning from Dustin with that part.
Yeah, I think what really stood out, thank you. And I think what really stood out in what I heard you and Felicia, Steph, and Dustin and myself, what all of us said on today's episode, what all of us said is really that this is a journey for us. None of us feel we have arrived at perfect self-forgiveness, and I think Devin laid the great foundation, the groundwork for us last time, that, perfection isn't something that's attainable. So what we're saying is this is just part of the journey, part of the soul-focused journey that I'm excited to be on with you and with Cindy and with everybody that's listening. And I think this, we have one more part, Martina, and Cindy's going to have a segment on that. And the part 2 of the conversation with Felicia and Stephany is going to happen on that one as well. So anything else you want to say, Martina, before we say goodbye for the day?
No, I can't wait to listen to your segment with Felicia and Stephany, and I'm looking forward to Cindy's segment next week. Thank you all for joining in.
Awesome. And we just want to thank you, as always, as Martina just did. We want to thank you for being on this journey with us. Know that we love you. We care about you. We are here for you. Please come to soulfocusgroup.com. Check out what we're doing. Subscribe, like. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit subscribe, hit like. It's really helpful for us to get more and more people on this journey with us. So, as always, we thank you for your time, for your attention, and then we ask that you stay safe, you stay well, and most of all, you stay soul focused.